In this footage of the construction site of BYD's flagship electric vehicle factory in Brazil, released by labor authorities, prosecutors found over 160 Chinese construction workers enduring what authorities call slave-like conditions, where workers were sleeping on bare steel bunks without mattresses and forced to share a single filthy bathroom among dozens of people. In this video, we'll dive into one of the biggest labor scandals in the global EV industry and explain why even companies selling green products must be held accountable for how they treat workers. Let's start with the reality on the ground for the Chinese workers building BYD's new electric vehicle complex in Camaçari, Bahia. In December 2024, a joint operation by Brazil's Labor Public Ministry and several federal agencies raided the workers' dorms and construction areas after an anonymous complaint. Inspectors found at least 163 Chinese workers living in overcrowded and disorganized accommodations, with dirty sinks, food that resembled pig feed, and rooms where up to 31 people shared a single bathroom. Many workers slept on steel frame beds with no mattresses, using thin blankets or nothing at all, and had nowhere secure to store their belongings, which were piled on empty bed frames. Around 60 workers shared just 8 unisex showers that also served as makeshift laundry spaces, creating constant queues and serious sanitation problems. The bathrooms and showers were located right next to kitchen areas, violating local health rules and leaving workers smelling sewage inside their dorm rooms. Food was stored and served in unsanitary conditions, pots left uncovered on the floor or near beds, with no proper refrigeration under Brazil's summer heat, forcing many workers to eat on their beds because there were too few tables. Access to safe water was another basic problem. Investigators reported that workers had no reliable drinking water and resorted to untreated tap water, even filling bottles to take to the construction site, and some were seen washing their feet in construction wastewater. To use the limited toilets, they had to wake up at around 4 a.m. to queue, just to be ready for a 5:30 a.m. shift. On top of this, workdays were long and relentless. Labor inspectors and workers described 10-hour shifts, often 7 days a week, with no weekly rest, in some cases of 25 consecutive days without a break. Under Brazil's definition, slavery-like conditions include degrading accommodation, exhausting hours that risk health, debt bondage, and restrictions on freedom. Criteria investigators said clearly applied here. The harsh routine, poor safety, and exposure to strong sun led to multiple workplace accidents. According to labor inspectors, one metal worker lost a finger in an accident. Another laborer broke his leg in an open fracture, and days later, a carpenter lost full function in his right hand after a chainsaw mishap. He told investigators he'd been exhausted. While local Brazilian workers on the same project generally had better contracts, working hours, and housing, the Chinese migrant workers bore the brunt of the worst conditions, deepening the sense that they were being treated as second-class labor. With conditions so horrific, you might wonder, how did these workers end up in this situation in the first place? The story runs through BYD's choice of contractor and the way those workers were recruited, controlled, and silenced. The Camaçari plant is BYD's first electric vehicle factory in Brazil and was promoted as its largest and most advanced production base outside China, intended to supply all of Latin America and eventually create up to 10,000 to 20,000 local jobs. To build it quickly and cheaply, BYD hired Chinese contractor Jinjiang, also described in some sources as a BYD-linked construction arm, to bring in Chinese construction workers seen as cheaper and more willing to work overtime. According to court documents, the recruitment scheme began in China, where recruiters and foremen made false promises of good pay, often more than $1,700 per month, significantly more than workers could earn at home. When the workers arrived in Brazil, however, they found themselves in poorly built shelters with dozens of people crammed together. Their actual pay turned out to be much lower than what had been promised. According to investigations and a contract obtained by Reuters, workers had to pay an almost $900 equivalent deposit, hand over their passports, and accept that up to 60 to 70% of their wages would be withheld and only released when they finished their contracts and returned to China. Workers who tried to leave early risked losing their deposit, all withheld wages, and even having to pay for their own tickets home just to get their passports back. Labor law experts said these are classic red flags of bonded labor, a form of forced labor where tied wages, confiscated passports, and heavy financial penalties make it almost impossible for workers to leave their jobs. Some housing structures were patrolled by armed guards, according to investigators. They don't speak Portuguese, so they couldn't lodge complaints or even fully comprehend the situation. Trapped in a foreign country thousands of miles from home, there was simply no way out. The abuse went beyond exploitative contracts and living conditions. In an interview published by the Washington Post in March 2026, 3 Brazilian employees reported witnessing Chinese foremen physically striking their subordinates. 2 Brazilian BYD employees grew so alarmed by what they witnessed that they launched their own clandestine investigation and repeatedly warned BYD Brazil's senior leadership about the safety risks and the company's legal exposure in a country where managers can face prison time for severe labor violations. "I went home sobbing," one recalled, but their warnings went unanswered. Brazil's Labor Public Ministry concluded that these arrangements amounted to conditions akin to slavery, and on the federal level, the workers were treated as victims of international trafficking for labor exploitation. Under Brazilian law, even if a contractor formally employs the workers, the main company, in this case BYD, shares responsibility for ensuring safe, humane conditions on its site. In early 2025, prosecutors suspended part of the construction, pushed the government to halt new BYD-related work visas, and later filed a public civil lawsuit seeking damages for collective moral harm and individual compensation. Local unions also began their own actions, arguing that bringing in a foreign contractor under such conditions undermined both labor standards and promised jobs for Brazilian workers. BYD's public response evolved over time. The company announced it had terminated its contract with Xinjiang for that segment of the work, moved the 163 rescued Chinese workers into hotels, and repeatedly stated that it has zero tolerance for labor law violations while pledging to review conditions across all contractors on the site. At the same time, some senior BYD executives publicly framed the scandal as a smear campaign by foreign forces targeting Chinese brands and China-Brazil relations, reposting contractor statements that rejected the enslaved label and emphasized workers' supposed willingness to stay. Xinjiang, on the other hand, posted a video featuring a group of Chinese workers, with one man reading out a letter that the company said had been jointly signed, saying that accusations they had been enslaved was an insult to their dignity. In the video, the worker insists the reports of slavery are inaccurate, says they were stunned by the prospect of being sent back to China, and stresses that they want to keep their jobs and continue working in Brazil. The video has now been removed from the social media site. After the initial media exposés and rescue operation by the authorities, another layer emerged: BYD's reaction inside the Bahia complex. According to a detailed investigation by Brazilian outlet Publica, BYD began closely monitoring employees at the plant after allegations of mistreatment and physical abuse of Chinese workers hit the news. New security cameras were installed not just on the shop floor but across administrative areas and warehouses, and posters appeared explicitly banning photography in those spaces. On company computers, a program supplied by BYD's IT team in China was rolled out to watermark documents with the user's name, machine, and date, making it easy to trace any leak back to a specific employee. An internal email explained that these measures were to prevent information leaks and protect industrial secrets, but many staff described the atmosphere as a witch hunt to find whoever had shared evidence of abuses. BYD insists such surveillance is standard for protecting strategic assets, especially for a company that applies dozens of patents per working day. But critics point to the timing. These measures were introduced only after the labor allegations surfaced, even though construction had started months earlier. Local sources reported that crisis management law firms and PR consultants were brought in, while some Brazilian employees associated with the contractor later lost their jobs, despite earlier assurances they would be protected. This combination of new monitoring, job insecurity, and strong public denials sent a clear signal. Speaking out could carry serious personal risks. For many observers, this raised questions not just about one factory, but about how major multinationals respond when confronted with evidence of abuse deep inside their supply chains. The BYD case in Brazil is a warning that ESG can't stop at emissions. Electric vehicles and green factories are not responsible business if they rely on labor practices that are slavery-like. So how can we stop workers in supply chains from being abused? At a minimum, lead companies must ban deposits, passport retention, and wage withholding in all supplier and contractor contracts, and ensure these rules are implemented before projects start. Guarantee that any migrant workers have contracts that comply with both local and home country laws, in a language they understand, with clear rights to rest days and safe housing. Involve independent unions and worker representatives early, giving them real access to work sites and dorms without fear of retaliation. Due diligence must also be continuous and independent, not a one-off box-ticking exercise. In Camaçari, complaints from local unions about sanitation, dining facilities, and lack of drinking water started months before the big raid, and there were already warnings about unsafe practices and accidents on BYD-linked projects. Robust systems would treat such signals as red flags, trigger truly independent audits, and involve trusted worker representatives long before authorities have to intervene. Whistleblowers and workers need safe channels, not surveillance. Instead of adding cameras and watermarking software after exposure, a responsible company would strengthen anonymous hotlines, protect those who speak up, and commit not to retaliate against anyone cooperating with investigators. Crisis management resources should focus on fixing root causes, contracts, conditions, and culture, not just controlling the narrative. Investors who see BYD as a climate play also need to raise their expectations. When prosecutors and media reveal patterns of forced labor indicators, that is a red flag that should trigger serious engagement and, if there is no progress, divestment. Integrating labor rights performance into financing decisions is essential if green portfolios are to be genuinely responsible. As viewers and consumers, especially if you are excited about electric cars and climate solutions, there are a few key actions to consider. First, buy responsibly. A product can reduce emissions and still be built on exploitation if labor rights are ignored. So asking how workers are treated at factories, mines, and construction sites is part of responsible climate action. Making purchase decisions based on these social concerns can turn everyday consumer choices into a powerful lever for fairer, more accountable supply chains. Second, support transparency and accountability. Follow and share reporting from investigative journalists and labor rights groups who uncover cases like this one. Public attention helped trigger the rescue of the Camaçari workers and pushed authorities and companies to act. Third, use your voice with brands and policymakers. When companies enter new markets and receive public incentives, such as land deals or tax breaks, citizens can demand that those benefits be tied to strong labor safeguards and independent monitoring. Writing to brands, signing petitions, or engaging on social media may feel small, but collectively it signals that human rights are part of how people judge corporate success. Back to the workers in Camaçari. In May 2025, Brazil's Labor Public Prosecutor's Office shifted from inspections to litigation, filing a public civil action against BYD and its contractors Xinjiang and Tecmonte. In December 2025, 1 year after the raid at the BYD construction site, the parties reached a settlement under which the companies will pay the equivalent of about $7.2 million, with half of that amount going directly to rescued workers as individual moral damages, and the other half earmarked for collective remedies via labor funds and institutions. Under the agreement, Xinjiang and Tecmonte also commit to a detailed set of do's and don'ts on workplace safety and labor protection that apply across all their work sites and business locations in Brazil, with BYD acting as guarantor if the contractors fail to comply. Unfortunately, the labor concerns at the BYD facility in Brazil are not an isolated event. In April 2026, labor rights group China Labor Watch published a report that read like a repeat of the Camaçari scandal, this time at BYD's factory in Szeged, Hungary. After interviewing 50 Chinese migrant workers, investigators documented 7-day work weeks with 12 to 14-hour shifts, systematic non-payment of overtime, and 20 to 30% of wages withheld in Chinese bank accounts. Workers were brought in on improper business visas that left them without healthcare access, and were told to lie to inspectors about their hours. Perhaps most troubling, one of the subcontractors employing these workers was a subsidiary of the same Xinjiang construction group that had been at the center of the Brazil scandal. The findings prompted the European Parliament to launch its first formal inquiry into labor violations by a Chinese automaker in the EU, with lawmakers demanding to know how forced labor practices were being replicated across BYD's global expansion. So, what do you think? What do you believe is most effective to prevent abuses in BYD's global supply chain? Stronger laws, tougher investor pressure, or more informed consumer choices? Let us know in the comments below. Give us a thumbs up and subscribe to channel CSR for more videos about responsible business practices in future.